Reality is Lord, a scientific view of God on a rapidly overheating planet. Now, I did a program a couple of years ago at a lectureship series in Victoria, British Columbia, at a Christian church. And there were a number of scientists in the congregation, and they specifically requested that I speak about, does it make sense to use God language in a modern evolutionary ecological context? And so you know that Tina Turner song, What's Love Got to Do with It? Well, I created my own version, so humor me here. What's God got to do with it? What's God but an ancient mythic notion? What's God got to do with it? Who needs Poseidon? Plate tectonics made the ocean. An old mentor of mine said, if you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. So I'm having fun. So that's what I want to talk about, because there are many different ways to think or speak about God. There are as many religious or theological ways as there are religious or theological traditions. There are a number of philosophical ways that people have attempted to speak of God. Famously, Paul Tillich spoke of God as the ground of being, and others. There are a number of psychological ways. God is love, God is compassion. I'm really not going to be speaking about any of those. It includes most of those, but I want to speak about what I'm going to suggest is the one scientific, evidential way of speaking about God. Now, if you lived in the Pacific Northwest, which is where this photo was taken, in eastern Washington, and you lived 500 years ago, and there was this huge boulder in the middle of a field, no other mountains anywhere nearby, what story would be told? What would your culture, your people tell? What story would be told about how that boulder got there?
God put it there.
Exactly. I mean, anything this cool or this, bizarre or this interesting demands a story. So not having a story simply wasn't an option. And my hunch is God did it would have been the way most cultures would have talked about how that boulder got there. Now some culture, or the goddess or great spirit, but some divine name. And there would be different stories about how that boulder got there, depending upon the tradition, but that God did it would have been the way most cultures would have talked about it. Well then, in the 1930s and 40s, geologists like J. Harlan Bretz began noticing these interesting geological features in the Pacific Northwest. And now we know that there are 17 times that the glaciers have come south and the glaciers have gone back in the last 2.5 million years. So 17 times the glaciers have come back, south and back. And every time the glaciers came south, they blocked the Clark Fork River and created Glacial Lake Missoula, which was almost as large as Lake Superior in terms of the water volume. And when it filled up, it overtopped the dam, broke through, and within 48 hours, all of this water would go rushing to the Pacific Ocean. And these icebergs would carry boulders along the way and drop them. It scoured the land, just took all the topsoil here. It couldn't get out of the Willamette Valley in south of Portland, which is one of the reasons why, and it dropped a lot of silt. So this is why that's one of the most fertile valleys to this day. And this happened dozens of times. Because each of the 17 glaciers, it happened a dozen or two times for each of those. So, how'd that boulder get there? Well, 500 years ago, God did it. Well, 70, 80 years ago, geologists started saying God didn't do it. It happened through natural causes. And what we can now finally appreciate is these are different ways of basically saying the same thing. The words God and evolution are both pointing to the same divine creative process. Both answer the question, how did we get here? How did everything get here? One uses the mythic or personification language of religion. The other uses the literal or empirical language of science. Arguing whether it was God or evolution that created everything is like debating whether it's Uncle Sam or the US government that insists we pay taxes every year. Or like quarreling over whether it was Gaia or plate tectonics that created the oceans and the mountains. Such silly and largely unnecessary confusion will remain the norm until we get and celebrate, as I said yesterday, what I think is the single most important scientific discovery about religion in the last 500 years, personification. So I want to share two more short little, one is 2 minutes long, one's 1 minute long, but in this series, Nature is Speaking, where Hollywood and Conservation International have come together to help us get the power of personification, that is giving human voice to what's other than human and what's inescapably real.
I am the ocean. I'm water. I'm most of this planet. I shaped it. Every stream, every cloud, and every raindrop, it all comes back to me. One way or another, every living thing here needs me. I'm the source. I'm what they crawled out of. Humans, they're no different. I don't owe them a thing. I give, they take, but I can always take back. That's just the way it's always been. It's not their planet anyway. Never was, never will be. But humans, they take more than their share. They poison me, then they expect me to feed them. Well, it doesn't work that way. If humans want to exist in nature with me and off of me, I suggest they listen close. I'm only going to say this once. If nature isn't kept healthy, humans won't survive. Simple as that. I could give a damn with or without humans. I'm the ocean. I covered this entire planet once, and I can always cover it again. That's all I have to say.
I am the mountain. I am nature's oldest temple. My glaciers and streams provide the water you drink. My forests, your wood, your clean air. From up here, I see how you've come to treat this world. You used to recharge your body and soul in the calm of my forests. You once climbed my peaks, seeking enlightenment. Now you take what you want and contemplate only your own gain. Open your eyes while there's still time. Because there's one more thing I see clearly. The cliff you're on, and the rocks below.
So I highly recommend you check out all of these. So I've begun speaking, and a number of us have, about ecology as the new theology. Every characteristic that we attribute to the divine derives from our experience of nature. If we imagine God as beautiful, gracious, loving, awesome, powerful, majestic, or faithful, it is because we have known or experienced beauty, grace, love, awe, power, majesty, or trustworthiness in the world. If we lived on the moon, and that's all we and our ancestors had ever known, all of our concepts and experience of the divine would reflect the barrenness of the lunar landscape. See, this is obvious when we think about it. We're just not used to thinking in these terms. Martin Buber, a famous Jewish theologian, spoke in his book, I and Thou, decades ago, about the necessity, if we hope to continue existing, of relating to reality, nature, as a thou, to be honored and respected, rather than an it, to be used and exploited. And that's exactly what we've been doing for the last 500 years. We've been relating to nature as a complex clock. What happened was we invented pendulum clocks. Nobody thought of God as a clockmaker outside a clockwork universe until we invented clocks. And so we started using this analogy of God as a clockmaker, an external clockmaker outside a clockwork universe. And of course it makes total sense because every clock that has ever been known to humanity, including any watch that you may be wearing, was made by an external creator. So if you imagine how nature is like a complex clock, the only way to imagine God, the creator, is outside the clock. The problem is that did two things. One, it trivialized God. No longer was God synonymous with reality. God was now a clockmaker outside an imaginary clockwork universe. So God becomes imaginary. You can believe in this external clockmaker, then you're a theist. Or if you disbelieve this external clockmaker, then you're an atheist. But both of them have a trivial, impotent, inconsequential notion of God in mind. A clockmaker. But nature also becomes desacralized. No longer is nature a thou to be respected and honored and feared. Now nature is something we think we can control. And the consequences have been catastrophic. Nature is nothing like a complex clock. It's a living system. It's a self-organizing system. I have these two quotes memorized. Thomas Berry said, "The world we live in is an honorable world. To refuse this deepest instinct of our being, to deny honor where honor is due, is to place ourselves on a head-on collision course with the ultimate forces of the universe." He said, this question of honor must be dealt with before any other question. It's ultimately not a political, economic, or even an environmental issue. It's ultimately a question of honor. Only the sense of the violated honor of Earth and the need to restore that honor will awaken in humans the passion and energy needed to co-create a just and healthy future. Gregory Bateson, one of the leading intellectuals of the last 75 years, said it just as powerfully or perhaps even more powerfully. He said, if you imagine God as a clockmaker outside a clockwork universe and you think of yourself as created in the image of God, you will inevitably see yourself, naturally see yourself as above and outside the things around you. And as you unrightfully claim all mind to yourself, you'll see the world around you as mindless and therefore not entitled to moral or ethical consideration. He said the world will seem to be yours to exploit. He said if you have this mindset and you have an advanced technology, your likelihood of survival will be that of a snowball in hell. You will die either of the toxic byproducts of your own hate or simply from overpopulation and overgrazing. You can add climate change in there too. This is one of the top 100 famous buildings in the world, Frank Lloyd Wright's Unity Temple in Chicago, and I spoke there about a year and a half ago. And I love this quote from Frank Lloyd Wright. He said, "I believe in God, I just spell it N-A-T-U-R-E. Evidence is how reality is revealing truth to us today. Evidence is modern day scripture. It's our main source of divine guidance today. Anytime any scripture, any tradition, any culture says God said this or God did that, what follows is always an interpretive personification. In other words, reality, the climate, the universe, whatever, is doing something, and then we interpret it as what God is saying or doing. And it's only our inability to read mythic literature that has made us blind and deaf to what God or reality has been revealing now for centuries through evidence. That's why that quote that I used with Thomas Berry last night, that we have been spiritually autistic, and that's one of the main reasons why we're in the mess we are. We are talking only to ourselves. We are not talking to the rivers. We are not listening to the wind and the climate. Most of the disasters that are happening now are a consequence of that spiritual autism. So let's take a look at how climate may be the greatest religious failure in human history. It's not only the world's most urgent moral issue, I suggest it's the single most significant religious failure in human history. Now, Connie and I had a sort of awakening. Our come to Jesus moment on climate happened about 3 years ago, December of 2012, we watched this TED Talk by David Roberts, Climate Change is Simple. Climate change went from the back burner to the front burner in a major way for us as a result of watching this. I basically watched it at 6 o'clock in the morning before Connie even woke up. I was in tears. I then woke her up and said, "Darling, we got to watch something together." We watched it together. We were both in tears. That afternoon we bought Bill McKibben's Earth, James Hansen's Storms of My Grandchildren, and we started immersing ourselves in the literature of climate. The AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, is the single most respected science body in the world. They came out about 2 years ago with a very uncharacteristically prophetic, and I use that word directly, What We Know campaign. Because based on scientific papers published between 2001 and 2012, 97% of climate scientists say climate change is real, humans are the main cause, and we must take immediate action to avoid absolute hellish, catastrophic conditions. And yet, if you ask Americans, something like 50%, almost half of Americans, like 46% or something like that, of Americans believe that the scientific community is widely divided on the issue. How is that possible? Well, my mother's favorite news outlet is one of them. But this movie, the book Merchants of Doubt, and this movie came out, and I have never, when I watched this movie, and you can get it on Netflix, I highly encourage you to watch it, this movie, Merchants of Doubt, because the same PR companies and the same scientists that confused the issue on tobacco for 50 years are now being hired by, guess who? Coal, oil, and natural gas. We don't have 50 years to confuse the issue. They were very successful. When I watched this movie, I actually had to go outside at one point, and I screamed, "No!" I was so angry. My voice was then wagged out for about 3 days. I call it the face of evil today. So here is a chart from NOAA, and this is over the course of 130 years. (1900). 1920, 1930, 1940, 1950, 1960, 1970, 1980, 1990, 2000, 2010, 2015. This is not projection. This is fact. This is what has already occurred over the course of the last 130 years. And it's just picking up steam. And notice how the Arctic was warming twice as fast. Here's how contrarians view global warming. They'll point to one of these 10-year periods and say, "Look, it's gone down." Here's how realists view global warming. Here's how skeptics, quote unquote, view Arctic sea ice decline. Here's how realists view Arctic sea ice decline. See, it's very easy to fudge the numbers and confuse people on television. I believe we're in the age of the return of prophets. I suggest that prophets aren't channeling any otherworldly entity, and prophets are not predicting the future. Prophets are those who are speaking on behalf of reality and doing so with unflinching authority. I see James Hansen as an early modern-day prophet, and he's still speaking prophetically. Here he is in 1981, speaking boldly and prophetically. And now he's regularly getting arrested. And when I say regularly, I mean regularly. Why this level of activism? Well, he himself says why. It's because of his grandchildren. This is one of the best books on climate change, Storms of My Grandchildren, the truth about the coming climate catastrophe and our last chance to save humanity. Here he is with Amy Goodman on Democracy Now!
These protests are what we call civil resistance, in the same way that Gandhi did. We're trying to draw attention to the injustice, because this is really analogous. This is a moral issue, analogous to that faced by Lincoln with slavery or by Churchill with Nazism. Because what we have here is a tremendous case of intergenerational injustice, because we are causing the problem, but our children and grandchildren are going to suffer the consequences. And our parents didn't know that they were causing a problem for future generations, but we do. The science has become very clear, and we're going to have to move to a clean energy future, and we could do that, and there would be many other advantages of doing it. Why don't we do it? Because of the special interests and because of the role of money in Washington.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons why campaign finance reform is so vital. Now here, this is very recent. This is just in the last week. This just came out from our Children's Trust, a major win. Federal court affirms constitutional right of kids and denies the motions of government and fossil fuel industry in the youth's landmark climate change case. I just want to read this. Magistrate Judge Thomas Coffin of the Federal District Court in Eugene, Oregon, decided in favor of 21 young plaintiffs and Dr. James Hansen on behalf of future generations in their landmark constitutional climate change case brought against the federal government and the fossil fuel industry. The court's ruling is a major victory for the 21 youth plaintiffs aged 8 to 19 from across the U.S. in what Bill McKibben and Naomi Klein called, quote, the most important lawsuit on the planet right now, unquote. These plaintiffs sued the federal government for violating their constitutional rights for life, liberty, and property, and their right to essential public trust resources by permitting, encouraging, and otherwise enabling continued exploitation, production, and combustion of fossil fuels. This is as important a court case as the planet has yet seen, said Bill McKibben, author and founder of 350.org. To watch the next generation stand up for every generation that will follow is as moving as it is significant. Kelsey Juliana, youth plaintiff from Eugene, Oregon, observed that, quote, this decision marks a tipping point on the scales of justice. Youth voices are uniting around the world to demand that government uphold our constitutional rights and protect the planet for our and future generations' survivability. This will be the trial of the century that will determine if we have a right to a livable future or if corporate power will continue to deny our rights for the sake of their own wealth. In 2014, Connie and I spoke along the route of the Great March for Climate Action. There were 50 marchers, including Kelsey, who marched from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C., 15 miles a day, from beginning in March, ending in November. And Connie and I we were sometimes a week or two ahead of the marchers, sometimes we were a week or two behind the marchers. I was regularly speaking at the climate rallies in the big cities along the way, and here she is with Bill Moyers. Kelsey Juliana, and I encourage you to watch this because you can see Bill Moyers is just, falling in love with this woman, like, oh my gosh, you are such a prophet. And she is so articulate. It's just really a powerful case. So people sometimes, you know, we can easily get overwhelmed in terms of climate. Like, what can we do? What can I do? Well, James Hansen, the major thing he's promoting is what he calls a revenue-neutral fee, carbon fee, and dividend. You can call it a carbon tax. It's basically, but then we give the money back to the people, not to government coffers. And Citizens Climate Lobby is one of the most important systemic things. I encourage everybody to get involved in some capacity in CCL, Citizens Climate Lobby, because they're basically one issue, which is we've got to put a fair price on carbon pollution. Because when we do that, we marshal the power of the market to help all of us move in the right direction. Bob Ingalls is a Republican evangelical from South Carolina who is one of my heroes because he says it more succinctly than anybody else I've ever heard. He says, I favor a conservative approach that marshals the power of the market and doesn't increase the size of government. Here it is in a nutshell. Put all the costs in all the fuels and eliminate all the subsidies, and then watch the free enterprise system solve the energy and climate problem. Bam! That's exactly it! Al Gore, Jim Hansen, Bill McKibben, everybody is saying this is what we have to do. And here's a Republican evangelical saying it as succinctly and powerfully as anybody. it's important that we all go through the stages of grief. My friend and colleague Brian McLaren says, if you haven't been tempted to serious despair as a result of climate, you don't get it. But if you stay there, you're part of the problem. See, it's honoring those feelings, but then not wallowing in it. And Bill Nye's Global Meltdown, Arnold Schwarzenegger and Bill Nye, it's 40 minutes long. It's up on YouTube. You can watch it for free. It was National Geographic did it. And Bill Nye is the patient. Arnold Schwarzenegger is the therapist. And he's guiding Bill Nye through the stages of grief. Kubler-Ross's stages of grief. And it's hysterical, and it's powerful, and it's really worth watching. I encourage it. I mentioned last night that my favorite author in the world is John Michael Greer. I've read 10 of his books in the last 2 years. And I suggest that there is no more powerful and effective way to allow someone very knowledgeable to guide you through the stages of grief than John Michael Greer. He writes one blog post every Wednesday night. Every Wednesday night since 2006, he's been posting one blog post. And it's like a chapter in a book. It's a well thought out essay. Connie and I, this is no exaggeration, our week goes like this. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Archdruid Day. Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Because his blog is the Archdruid Report. He happens to be the elected official of the Druid religion. But that's not what he's well known for. What he's well known for is his penetrating analysis of industrial civilization and the decline, and then a positive vision beyond it. So here's the long descent, which is the way empires and civilizations actually contract. Every decade is a little bit worse than the previous, and there's short recoveries, and it does like this. But, you know, that's how Rome declined. We talk about the collapse of the Roman Empire. It took 325 years. It was this. And then the positive vision, the ecotechnic future, envisioning a post-peak world. The Wealth of Nature, Economics as if Survival Mattered. This is one of the leading books in the field of ecological economics. After Progress is a book that I recently endorsed of his. And then Collapse Now and Avoid the Rush. The Best of the Archdruid Report. It's a collection of his most popular essays every Wednesday night for the last 10 years. And then this book, Dark Age America, is a book that actually he's asked me to record the audio of. So I'll be recording the official audiobook of that. It'll be coming out in a few months. A factual view of God and Revelation calls forth boldly pro-science, pro-future prophetic speech. Here's a young prophet. He's a poet. Poets are often prophets, because they speak on behalf of reality using symbolic language in ways that touch our hearts and move us to action, or at least are intended to. And here's just a short little video. I think it's about 2 minutes long. Drew Dillinger speaks prophetically.
This poem is called Hieroglyphic Stairway. It's 3:23 in the morning, and I'm awake because my great-great-grandchildren won't let me sleep. My great-great-grandchildren ask me in dreams, what did you do while the planet was plundered? What did you do when the earth was unraveling? Surely you did something when the seasons started failing, as the mammals, reptiles, birds were all dying. Did you fill the streets with protest when democracy was stolen? What did you do once you knew? I'm riding home on the Coma train. I've got the voice of the Milky Way in my dreams. I have teams of scientists feeding me data daily and pleading I immediately turn it into poetry. I want just this consciousness reached by people in range of secret frequencies contained in my speech. I am the desirous earth, equidistant to the underworld and the flesh of the stars. I am everything already lost. The moment the universe turns transparent and all the light shoots through the cosmos, I use words to instigate silence. I'm a hieroglyphic stairway in a buried Mayan city, suddenly exposed by a hurricane, a satellite circling Earth, finding dinosaur bones in the Gobi Desert. I am telescopes that see back in time. It's 3:23 in the morning, and I can't sleep because my great-great-grandchildren ask me in dreams, what did you do while the earth was unraveling? I want just this consciousness reached by people in range of secret frequencies contained in my speech.
I don't have to only have those dreams. My granddaughter, just looking into her face, calls me to greatness, calls me to wake up, to do whatever I can do. Minutes. Connie and I have been doing this work now for 14 years, traveling North America, sharing the sacred side of science, basically where science, inspiration, and sustainability intersect is what we've been passionately communicating for 14 years. Or you could say where evolution, ecology, and spirituality come together. Now, this is Connie's and my main website, thegreatstory.org. So let me just point out a few pages on this website that I think you may be particularly interested in. What is the great story? I'll be doing a little bit of this tomorrow, but the epic of evolution, big history. Connie has collected all the best videos and quotes from around the internet on what is the universe story, the epic of evolution, and why is it so important that we have a globally produced evidence-based creation story that unites all peoples. God in Big History is a 5-part series that I created for church study groups. Climate science. If you want to know what God has been revealing through evidence, and I'm using God, I'm just saying, this is what God's been telling us through evidence. But we've been blind and deaf to the fact that it's been God telling us this. Connie has collected the best science education videos, again, all over. This is one of the ways that you can share some of this with others. And then I consider the most important page on my website to be Grace Limits Audios. As I said last night, I've spent probably somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 hours recording books and blog posts, and they're all available on this Grace Limits Audios page. Any questions, comments, feedback related to what I shared this morning? And what I'd love to especially hear, what, if anything, did you find helpful, interesting, or inspiring? Or what did you find challenging or difficult?
Michael, I'm not trying to be provocative, but I want to ask a fairly serious question. The Christian church and other religions as well are selling an afterlife. And I hear nothing in your presentation that concerns any afterlife. So are they not working against your proposals?
Connie and I believe that only a science-honoring way of thinking about death can give us the inspiration that truly can make a difference, both personally and collectively. And my short answer is this, that thinking of the afterlife as merely my soul goes to some special place to be with God is actually a petty understanding. I was asked recently in an interview, Michael, do you believe in the afterlife? I said, I don't need to believe in the afterlife. I know that there's life after I die. Absolutely. I'll die and then life will go on. But it's actually, yeah, obviously I was trying to be a little humorous, but there is a way of thinking about death, a sacred science way of thinking about mortality and death, that actually, in my experience, and many of us who consider ourselves religious naturalists, find it infinitely more inspiring than the old idea that, you know, the gospel, the great news is cosmic fire insurance. You know, if I have the right beliefs, I have the card key that gets me to go to some special place when I die. It's like, I get to not burn forever. Ain't that good news? That's a pathetic understanding of the gospel. Yeah.
Maybe you can comment on a report I saw very recently about a group of older scientists who thought that human life, at least, would become extinct within about 100 years.
One of the people that Bill Nye, the science guy, interviewed, Bill Nye's Global Meltdown, is a guy who's very famous for speaking about the possibility, the very real possibility, that we may go extinct a lot sooner than that. We need to have humility about what we know and what's inevitable. I'll do a whole piece after the break this morning on what I think we can say confidently is inevitable. And it's not inevitable that we go extinct. What we do literally in the next 10 years could very well make the difference between extinction and really difficult times. There's no avoiding really difficult times. I personally, when I look at the paleoclimate data, that is the old climate, what we have in terms of, I actually am not convinced at all that we have triggered runaway feedback mechanisms. We have some, but not the ones that would necessarily cause our extinction. But as I share after the break, we absolutely are in a new regime. We no longer have the Holocene. We no longer have this mild climate of the last 10,000 years, and we're in a whole new world now. Yes, sir.
I could see going back to the congregation, my congregation, and sharing some of these concepts, which I'm not having any trouble embracing at all. And the term animism. That was one of the red flags in some of my training, is beware of that nature becomes God. Have you encountered any of that kind of flash over to beware of that animism concept? Can you pick that up?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that's interesting, and this is why language matters, as I was sharing last night in terms of Wittgenstein saying that many of our problems are because language trips us up. If we have had such a phobic relationship to the natural world, which has actually gotten us in the mess. Why we're destroying the air, water, soil, and life upon which we depend is because we've been thinking of it as merely an it. The idea, I think it will eventually be seen and rejected by our grandchildren as perhaps the most damning and belief of all time. Worship the Creator, not the creation. As if it was even possible to honor God without honoring God's nature. It is not possible. The idea that I can praise God and trash the environment or treat others in an unjust way is idolatry. It's insanity. And yet, exactly what you were pointing to, words like pantheism. Is this pantheism? Is this animism? No, the word pantheist, the word pantheism only came into being in 1709 with John Toland. It was a direct confront. It was trying to counter the mechanistic worldview. See, that's why language trips us up. Animism, the idea that everything is alive and everything speaks, is simply the pre-scientific understanding that we now understand that our brains relate most healthfully when we personify, when we have an I-thou relationship. I mean, Connie and I can do this, we do this all the time with everything. For example, the photos that you saw, Connie has been taking, we've got like 10,000 photos of North America. Our personification of North America is Nora. We say we're falling ever more in love with Nora. We've given a proper name, a sacred name to this continent. We don't call it North America. So the screensaver, what we call it is Nora porn. Right? It's these gorgeous photos of Nora, right? We've personified our relationship is Jasmine. There's Connie, there's Michael, and there's Jasmine. And Jasmine is the whole that is more than the sum of the two of us. It's a proper name for our relationship. But by giving it a proper name, we have a relationship to us or to we that we don't have if all we think is Michael and Connie. And sometimes it's really clear what Connie wants to do and it's clear what Michael wants to do. But when one of us asks, what does Jasmine want to do? It allows me as a man to not be attached to my position, and I can perhaps go with something that she might have suggested in the first place, but I don't feel like she's won and I've lost. I feel proud that I'm doing what's good for Jasmine. Now, why it is that Jasmine usually wants to do what Connie wanted to do in the first place, I haven't figured that one out. But, you know, a happy wife is a happy life, as they say. So for me, God is a personification. God is nothing less than a personification of reality, what's inescapably real. And so yes, when we personify, from one perspective people could say, oh, that's animism, that's pantheism. No, it's simply having a respectful, healthy, honorable relationship to what's fundamentally, undeniably, and inescapably real. And yes, we need to re-embrace the kind of indigenous wisdom that the native peoples all over the world have had. I'll go more into that after the break.
You know, you said how important the personification is, that we just automatically do that. But how do we get past equating it with, you know, the name, or like God as a male? Well, whatever we personify, then that becomes holy. Men are more higher than women because Jesus is male, Yahweh's male. So we are. Can you say something about that?
Yeah, I'm happy to. In fact, that's one of the reasons why I've started, in my writing, I'm starting to spell out God, G-O-D-D-E, because it gives it that sort of feminine twist. Because, of course, reality is neither mother nor father, but reality is mother-like. Reality is father-like. In other words, our metaphors are metaphors. There's personifications, and they're accurate, but if we trivialize them when we start literalizing them. The challenge is that we tend to do that instinctually. For example, Connie and I, as I mentioned, Nora. We personify Nora. We've got this personal relationship with this continent. It wouldn't take very long, probably 2 generations, my granddaughter telling stories about us after we're dead could very well say, oh yeah, Grandma and Grandpa, they believed that this continent had a spirit called Nora. Notice the difference. They believed the continent had a spirit called Nora. No, we don't. We personify this continent as Nora. There's a difference. So I don't know. But what I do know is the feminist theology critique, the recognition, Sally McFague was one of my early sheroes, my heroes in this ecological theology. And she talked about models of God. Our metaphors and models matter. Yeah.
Yes, what concerns me a little bit is we're talking a lot about America here, and we have driven the Industrial Revolution, Western Europe, but are there Reverend Michael Dowds in China, in India, and Russia, and Latin America? Do we know what's going on in? There's a whole lot more of them than there are of us.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I have been in communication with a number of people who are clearly bringing an ecological evolutionary worldview into their tradition. There's a young man, for example, I almost see him as a spiritual son, although I didn't really have an enormous impact on him. Amir Ahmad is his name, but he wrote a book called My Islam, and it's I-S-L-A as an at, A-M, Islam. And it's basically trying to do what I tried to do for Christianity, and thank God for evolution, he's trying to do for the Islamic world. And he asked me to coach him, because he had read my book, it made a big difference for him, and he asked me to coach him on the language, because where he was living in Indonesia, and where I can be pretty bold, and I'm not really concerned that somebody's going to kill me. I mean, it could happen, but I'm not really concerned about it, whereas he really has to be concerned about that. So he was asking me, can you coach me on the language on how to be bold without being so bold that I'm dead? And I was only partially successful. He is still alive, but his book was banned in Indonesia, and he had to seek political asylum, and he now lives in Vancouver, Canada. But I've been in communication with others as well, and I don't know extensively how far that's furthered.
There are 100 billion snowflakes swirling in the cosmic storm. Each one is a galaxy, a billion stars or more. And each star is a million Earths, a giant fiery sun, high up in some sky, maybe shining on someone. Deep inside a snowflake I am floating quietly. I am infinitesimal, impossible to see. Sitting in my tiny kitchen, in my tiny home, staring out my window at a universe of snow. But my soul is so much bigger than the very tiny me. It reaches out into the snowstorm like a net into the sea. Out to all the lovely places where my body cannot go. I touch that beauty and embrace it in the bosom of my soul. And so brief and fleeting is this tiny life of mine, like a single quarter note in the march of time. But my soul is like the music, it goes back to ancient days, back before it wore a human face, long before it bore my name. Because my soul is so much older than the evanescent me. It can describe the dawn of time like a childhood memory. It is a spark that was begotten of the darkness long ago. What my body has forgotten, I remember in my soul. This life together, my giant soul and tiny me, one resembling forever, one like smoke upon the breeze, one the deep abiding ocean, one a sudden flashing wave, and counting galaxies like snowflakes, I would swear we were the same. Oh, my soul belongs to beauty, takes me up to lofty heights, teaches sacred stories to me, sanctifies my tiny life, lays a bridge across the ages, melts the boundaries of my bones, paints a bold eternal fate